Everyone told him to walk away. "Let nature take its course," they said. "You can't raise a wild predator. One day she'll turn on you." But where others saw a threat, Akira saw a life worth saving. And he couldn't leave her to die. He turned his kitchen into an ICU, sleeping on the hardwood floor just to keep her calm. For months, he fought to keep her alive. And as she grew stronger, he carefully reintroduced her to the forest, guiding her toward independence, teaching her what was safe, and eventually letting her return fully to the wild. But the story didn't end there. The bobcat kept coming back to visit him for years, until one day she returned, and she didn't come alone. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The early morning light over the Ozark foothills was usually a source of comfort for Akira's, a man whose life moved in rhythm with the rising and setting of the sun. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp pine needles and the earthy musk of thawing soil. It was a bright, clear Tuesday in late October, the kind of day that usually promised productivity and the quiet satisfaction of farm work. But as Akira's drove his battered pickup truck down the gravel lane toward the main road, the brightness of the morning did little to illuminate the shadow that caught his eye near the pasture gate. Akira's was a man of few words, weathered by 60 years of American sun and wind. He had lived on this land alone since his wife passed 5 years prior, filling the silence with the hum of machinery and the rustle of wind through the corn stalks. He knew every dip in the land, every fox den, and every hawk's nest. So, when he saw the small, motionless bundle of mottled fur pressed against the fence post, he knew immediately that it didn't belong. He stopped the truck, the engine idling with a rough cough, and stepped out. His boots crunched on the gravel. As he approached, the bundle shifted slightly, revealing not a domestic barn cat, but the unmistakable tufted ears and bobbed tail of a lynx rufus, a bobcat. She was tiny, a kitten no more than a few weeks old, but she was in a state that would break the heart of the hardest man. Her fur, usually a beautiful tapestry of spots and stripes designed for camouflage, was matted with mud and burrs. Her ribs were visible, jutting out painfully against her loose skin. She was lying in the dirt, her eyes shut tight against a world that had seemingly abandoned her. Akira's knelt, his knees popping in the cold air. "Hey there, little one," he whispered, his voice raspy from disuse. The kitten let out a sound that wasn't a growl or a hiss, but a weak, desperate mewl. It was the cry of an animal that had given up. Akira's looked around, scanning the tree line for a mother. A mother bobcat is fiercely protective. She would not leave a kitten this young exposed in the open unless she was dead. It was hunting season in the county. The gunshot echoes that sometimes rolled over the hills in the evenings told the likely story. This kitten was an orphan, a casualty of the season, starving, frightened, and too exhausted to even try to run away. He reached out a calloused hand. The kitten flinched but didn't pull away. She simply didn't have the energy. Akira scooped her up. She weighed nothing, a feather made of bone and desperation. She was cold, dangerously so. He tucked her inside his flannel jacket against the warmth of his chest and turned back to the truck. The farm work would have to wait. The first 24 hours were a battle fought in the kitchen of Akira's farmhouse. He called the local animal services first, hoping for a professional to take over. The voice on the other end was sympathetic but firm. "We're overrun, Mr. Akaris. Unless she's injured, we don't have the staff for neonatal wildlife. Most folks just let nature take its course." Akira's hung up the phone. He called a friend, a neighbor down the road named Elias, who had hunted these woods for 40 years. "You found a bobcat?" Elias asked, incredulous. "Akira's put it back. You can't raise a wild cat. It's a predator. It's got bacteria, parasites. And besides, if the mother's gone, that's just the way of the woods. Don't interfere." "She's dying, Elias," Akira said, looking at the limp form on a heating pad in a cardboard box. "Everything dies," Elias replied. "Don't make it your problem." But Akira's hung up again. He looked at the kitten. She was shivering, her body trying to generate heat she didn't have the fuel to produce. He knew enough about animals to know that hypothermia would kill her before starvation did. He kept the heating pad on low, wrapping a towel around it to prevent burns, a crucial step in wildlife triage, and began the slow process of rehydration. He mixed a Pedialyte solution, warming it slightly. Using an eyedropper, he touched a drop to her pale gums. She didn't swallow at first. He waited. He tried again. A tiny pink tongue flicked out. A victory. For the next 2 weeks, Akira's didn't sleep more than 2 hours at a stretch. He named her Emma, a soft human name for a creature of the wild, perhaps to bridge the gap between their species. He ordered high-quality milk replacer designed for wild felines, knowing that cow's milk would cause fatal diarrhea. He stimulated her to go to the bathroom with a warm, damp cloth, mimicking the tongue of the mother she had lost. The nights were the hardest. In the wild, a kitten sleeps in a pile with siblings and a mother. Alone in the box, Emma would wake up screaming, a piercing, lonely cry that echoed through the empty farmhouse. It was a sound of pure terror. The first night she cried like that, Akira's tried to ignore it, thinking she needed to learn. But the sound tore at something deep inside him, touching the same loneliness he had felt since his wife died. He grabbed his pillow and a blanket and lay down on the hardwood floor of the kitchen, right next to the box. He rested his hand inside, letting his fingers brush her fur. Emma stopped crying. She crawled over the towel, found his hand, and curled her small body around his thumb. She began to purr, a rough, erratic engine noise. Akira's fell asleep on the floor, his back aching, but his heart strangely full. As the weeks turned into months, the snow began to fall, blanketing the farm in white. Emma grew. The starving scrap of fur transformed into a sleek, muscular adolescent. Her spots darkened, her ear tufts grew long and elegant, and her eyes turned from baby blue to a piercing, intelligent gold. Akira's knew he walked a dangerous line. In wildlife rehabilitation, the goal is to keep the animal wild, to prevent them from imprinting on humans. But Emma was a singleton orphan. She had no siblings to wrestle with, no mother to teach her boundaries. Akira's became her mother, her playmate, and her teacher. He dedicated his days to her education. He couldn't teach her to hunt like a bobcat, but he could provide the environment for her instincts to wake up. He dragged turkey feathers on strings across the living room floor to hone her reflexes. He hid food in puzzle boxes to teach her problem solving. When she was 4 months old, he began taking her outside. He didn't use a leash. He simply opened the back door and walked out. Emma would follow, stepping high through the snow, her oversized paws acting as natural snowshoes. "Come on, Em," he'd call softly. She would dash up a tree, scaling the bark with terrifying speed, then look down at him, chirping. Bobcats are quiet creatures, but they have a vocabulary of chirps, growls, and purrs. Emma talked to Akira's constantly. He taught her what was dangerous, When a neighbor's dog barked in the distance, Icarus would freeze and make a low warning sound. Emma learned to associate that sound with danger, crouching low and freezing until he gave the signal that it was safe. He was teaching her the language of the woods, translated through a human dialect. However, the criticism from his community didn't stop. He met Elias at the local feed store one morning in February. "Heard you still got that cat," Elias said, leaning against the counter. "You're playing with fire, Akira's. One day she's gonna turn. She's a killer. It's in her blood." "She's got a name, Elias," Akira said quietly, loading bags of grain onto a cart. "And she's smarter than half the people in this town." "It ain't about smarts," Elias spat. "It's about nature. You can't tame the wild." "I'm not taming her," Icarus replied, looking his friend in the eye. "I'm saving her." Spring arrived with a violent beauty, storms washing away the snow and leaving the world green and vibrant. Emma was now nearly full-grown, a magnificent specimen of American wildlife. She was roughly 20 pounds of muscle and instinct. She had begun to hunt on her own during their walks, catching field mice and voles. Akira's knew the time was coming. The soft release is the hardest part of rehabilitation. It requires the human heart to break so the animal's spirit can fly. He started leaving the back door open at night. At first, Emma wouldn't go. She would sit on the porch, watching the darkness, then trot back inside to sleep at the foot of Akiras's bed. But the call of the wild is a song that cannot be ignored forever. One night in May, she didn't come back inside. Akira sat in his kitchen chair, staring at the open door. The crickets sang and the owls hooted, but the house felt empty in a way it hadn't since the funeral. He felt a profound sense of failure mixed with pride. Had he taught her enough? Would she know to avoid the road? Would she know to run from men with guns? He didn't sleep that night. He busied himself the next day fixing fences, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line. 2 days passed, then 3. On the 4th evening, as the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of violet and bruised orange, Akira sat on his porch, a cup of cold coffee in his hand. He heard a rustle in the tall grass near the barn. Out stepped Emma. She looked different, wilder. Her fur was groomed, her movements fluid and cautious. She stopped 10 yards away and looked at him. Akira's didn't move. He didn't call out. He let her decide. Emma trotted forward, closing the distance. She walked right up the steps, rubbed her cheek against his boot, a marking behavior claiming him as hers, and let out a sharp, familiar chirp. Akira's let out a breath he felt he'd been holding for 4 days. "Hello, girl," he whispered. She didn't stay the night. She accepted a bowl of water, accepted a brief scratch behind the ears, and then turned and melted back into the shadows of the forest. But she had returned. The bond had held. This became their routine. Emma was a wild bobcat now. She hunted her own food, she established her own territory which overlapped with the farm, and she lived by the laws of the forest. But every day, usually at dusk, she would visit. Sometimes she would sit on the fence post while Akira's worked in the garden. Sometimes she would bring him gifts, a dead mouse or a rabbit, leaving them on the porch as a contribution to the pack. Akira's would thank her solemnly and dispose of them later. It was a partnership, a mutual acknowledgement of family. However, the turning of the leaves brought dread to Akira's heart. November was approaching. Deer season, predator calling season. The woods around the farm would soon be filled with orange vests and rifles. Akiras lay awake at night, terrified. Emma was smart, but she trusted him. Would she trust the wrong human? Would she see a silhouette in a tree stand and think it was her father figure? He knew he couldn't lock her up. That would destroy her soul. He had to change the world she lived in. It was a radical idea, one born of desperation. He went to the town hall where the local hunting club held their monthly meeting. He walked in, a farmer among sportsmen, men who viewed predators as competition for deer and turkey. "I need to ask a favor," Akiras announced, standing at the front of the room. The room went quiet. Elias was there, sitting in the front row. "What is it, Akiras? Need help with the harvest?" "No," Akiras said. "I want to invite you all to my farm, tomorrow evening. Leave your guns in the trucks. I want you to meet someone." The curiosity was palpable. The next evening, 5 trucks pulled up Akiras' driveway. 6 men, including Elias, stepped out. They were rugged men, respectful of nature but practical about its harshness. "This better be good," Elias grumbled, zipping up his jacket against the chill. "Sit on the porch," Akiras instructed. "Be quiet, no sudden movements." The men sat. Akiras brought out a pot of coffee, but nobody drank. They waited. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the twilight settled in. Then she appeared. Emma emerged from the tall grass like a ghost. She froze when she saw the group of strangers. Her ears swiveled, radar dishes catching the sound of their breathing. Her tail twitched. The men held their breath. In the wild, a bobcat is a phantom. You might see a flash of tan, and then it's gone. To see one standing 20 feet away, calm and regal, was unheard of. Akiras simply held out his hand. "It's okay, Em." To the astonishment of the hunters, the wildcat didn't flee. She assessed the threat, looked at Akiras, and apparently decided that if he allowed these men here, they were safe. She walked up to the porch steps. She didn't let the strangers touch her, but she walked past them, weaving through the legs of Akiras' chair, purring so loudly it could be heard across the yard. She sat on the top step, looking out over her territory, flanked by the very men who might have shot her. "My God," Elias whispered, his voice trembling. She's beautiful." "She's 3 years old," Akiras said softly. "Her mother was shot by poachers. I raised her from 12 ounces." He looked at the men. "She trusts me. And because she trusts me, she's sitting here with you. She's not a trophy. She's not a pest. She's a neighbor." Emma stayed for 10 minutes, a lifetime in the wild, before drifting back into the night. The silence on the porch was heavy, but it wasn't awkward. It was the silence of reverence. "I didn't know," one of the younger hunters said, wiping his eye. "I mean, you see them in the scope and they're just targets. But up close..." "She's off limits," Elias announced, his voice gruff but firm. He looked around at the other men. "Word goes out tonight. Akiras' land and the woods bordering it. No cats. We don't shoot cats in this valley anymore. Not this one. Not any of them." The men nodded. It was a pact, sealed not with ink, but with the shared witness of something wild and miraculous. Years passed. The story of the farmer and the bobcat became a local legend. A quiet myth passed around the feed store and the diner. Akiras grew older, his movements slower, his hair whiter. But the visits never stopped. One evening in late spring, the air thick with the scent of blooming honeysuckle. Emma arrived later than usual. Akira's was sitting in his rocking chair, a blanket over his knees. She didn't come alone. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and let out a specific low churgle, a sound Akira's hadn't heard since she was a kitten. From the shadows of the azalea bush, two tiny heads popped up. Kittens. They were miniature replicas of her, wide-eyed and stumbling. Emma looked up at Akira's, her golden eyes filled with a profound, intelligent calmness. She nudged the kittens forward. She was introducing them. Akira's felt tears stream down his weathered cheeks, hot and cleansing. He had worried about her legacy. He had worried that by saving her, he had somehow broken the line of nature. But he hadn't. He had restored it. She was thriving. She was a mother. The cycle that had been broken by violence on that cold October morning years ago had been mended by patience and love. Emma allowed the kittens to sniff the bottom step, to smell the scent of the man who had been their mother's savior. Then, with a soft grunt, she called them back. She looked at Akira's one last time, a long, lingering gaze that carried a weight of gratitude no human language could articulate. As she led her family back into the safety of the dark, Akira sat back in his chair, the warmth of the moment chasing away the chill of the evening. He realized then that he hadn't just saved a bobcat. He looked out at the dark woods, which no longer felt empty or threatening, but full of life and connection. The loneliness that had plagued him for years had vanished, replaced by a deep, abiding peace. He had stepped across the divide between man and nature, extending a hand not to take, but to give. And in return, the wild had reached back, healing him in ways he never expected. The criticism, the sleepless nights, the fear, it was all worth it. Compassion, he realized, was the only force powerful enough to bridge the gap between species. It was the universal language, understood by the heart of a man and the soul of a bobcat alike. And as the moon rose high and bright over the American wilderness, Akira's closed his eyes and smiled, knowing that out there in the wild dark, his family was safe.